I shall present to you French experience regarding the TYSEDMUS, and my talk is not only to present the results, but also to present the story of the way we are working in France around the MS, and the way at the present time we are collecting information regarding new drugs which are used in the treatment of MS. So my title is from natalizumab and EDMUS to TYSEDMUS and OFCEP. You will understand the acronyms thereafter. I hope so anyway. So it's not necessary to remember the audience that natalizumab has been tested in the 2 pivotal trials, which have demonstrated a very huge efficacy. At the present time, it's one of the most efficient drugs in MS regarding the effect on relapse rate on one side and the effect on disability. Maybe mitoxantrone could be also efficient, but in practice it's much more efficient than the first-line drugs like Copaxone and interferon. The relapse rate is diminished by 2/3. The accumulation of disability is diminished by 40% in 2 years, and the MRI activity is decreased by 90%, which is a huge effect of the drug. The tolerance, as everybody knows, was considered as good, if not excellent, but the safety, of course, is the concern regarding the risk of PML and possibly the risk of malignancies. So when the drug was becoming to be approved in France, the health authorities, I mean the AFSAPs, Agence Française de Sécurité Sanitaire des Produits de Santé, decided to implement a risk management plan. And at that time, this was the opportunity for the French neurologist to approach the French agency and to explain to them how we were working in France around MS. So the care of MS in France has very specific points. The first is that we are working in a network, which is called the TYSEDMUS network for European database for multiple sclerosis, which is made of 63 centers with all the university departments of neurology. There are 28 throughout the country, and what we call the city and hospital health regional networks, which are 18, and which are specifically dedicated to the care of MS patients. So you see that we have throughout the country a dense network for the care of the patients. The second point is that all of the French neurologists in charge of MS are using the same software, which is TYSEDMUS. You have here the synopsis, which is produced by the software. It's not, it's in fact software which has been specifically developed for MS since 1990 mainly. At the time we were selected for a European concerted action, and the main project, one of the main projects of this concerted action was to develop a specific database for the description of MS. And since then, you may see on this graph, I don't want to go into details, the different steps and landmarks of the development of the software. And at the present time, the common language is adopted. We may say it's a language which had been developed throughout a European-wide consultation. So it's not only the French system, it's a European-wide system. And the common language has been transformed in a software. At the present time, the software is disseminated in more than 280 centers and more than 40 countries. The third point is that the use of TYSEDMUS in France is rather particular. I mean, at the present time, we are using it for the full description of the patient with MS. So it's more or less an electronic medical record. The paper forms are more or less discarded for the description of the disease. The second point, which is very important, is that the system is fully integrated in the daily medical practice. So the neurologist taking care of his patients with MS is using the common language, the TYSEDMUS common language. That does not mean that he's using the system in his office, but he is using the common language. So there are different ways of using this language in France, either directly, the neurologist entered directly the information in his database, indirectly, is completing forms and sending them to the regional MS center, which is collecting the data and thereafter registering the data in the database. And we may say the third way of working is to be a subcontractant. I mean, is sending the letter following the visit to the regional MS center in a language which is compatible with EDMUS, and thereafter the local regional center register the data in the database. So in that way, we may consider that the French network of neurologists is more or less gathering the data from the vast majority of patients with MS in France. And the third point is that precisely by having this network, by using the same software, we have progressively built cohorts, which is made now of more than 30,000 persons with MS throughout the country, which means that at the present time, we may say that more or less half of the patients with MS in France are registered in the system. And for all of them, we have data regarding the clinical aspects, the therapeutic aspects, the MRI aspects, and so on. So the full description of the disease. This cohort, which has been progressively built through the last 20 years, has already been studied in some respects. For instance, the pregnancy, the vaccinations, the dissociation between relapses and disability, and the natural history of MS with a childhood onset. So having presented this tool, which could be available for the French authorities regarding the pharmacoepidemiological study of TYSEDMUS in France, the authorities decided to set up, to implement TYSEDMUS. TYSEDMUS means TYSEDMUS through the French EDMUS databases, and it's an observational prospective phase 4 pharmacoepidemiological follow-up study of patients with MS and treated with natalizumab in France, based on the French network of neurologists using EDMUS. The sponsor is a French agency. The supports are different, but one of them is very important, is Biogen. You will see why. Because, of course, the authorities provide us the ways, some support, financial support for gathering the data, but if you want to have good quality data, exhaustivity and so on, you must provide the investigators with human beings, CRAs and so on. So the agency provided us some funding, but which was not enough. And after this first step, we approached the company and asking her to help us beside the national agency and to provide some funding in order to provide the investigators with human beings. And you will see the consequence of the recruitment and the enrollment of, in this study. And the last point is the coordination, which is organized in Lyon. So you have to quick look here to the participants. It's involving a scientific committee, a coordinating center, but all the investigators with the head of the departments which are involved in France in this study. And the objectives of TYSEDMUS are first to establish the safety profile of natalizumab, of course, in real-life settings, to determine also the incidence of adverse events, which may be infusion-related, hypersensitivity, development of anti-natalizumab antibodies, infection, and so on, pregnancies, malignancies. And secondary outcomes are to describe the evolution of patients treated with TYSEDMUS in terms of relapses, DSS score, MRI, and so on. Also to determine the condition of use in real life, and to compare, the last point, to compare the incidence of serious or opportunistic infections or malignancies between the exposed population and the non-exposed population. And here are the inclusions at the present time. You may see here the more or less the total number of patients in France which are treated with TYSEDMUS according to time here. This figure is provided by the company. Here you see in blue the number of fully registered cases in the TYSEDMUS study. At the present time, it amounts to 2,055. And what is interesting to see is that here is the time at which support from Biogen has been provided to the regional investigators, and you see the consequence in terms of enrollment is very striking. It has been a trigger very efficient for making the regional investigators sending their files, completing their file and sending them to us. And here is a total of what we call promises, all the cases which are locally registered but not yet sent to the central database. So what are the characteristics and inclusion? I may say it's more or less the same as in Italy. We have been very restrictive in the indications of the cases, and the result is that we see patients which are rather more active in terms of clinical relapses, or more active also in terms of DSS score than the population which has been recruited in the pivotal trial, AFFIRM trial. So I don't want to go into details, but only to say that there are very active patients with close to 2 relapses in the previous 12 months before start of the TYSEDMUS, and an EDSS score which was rather high at 3.6, which means more or less working disability at that time. What about the follow-up at the present time? 20 months as a mean and as a median. At the present time, we are aware of 425 patients who have stopped natalizumab for different reasons. We may say about 1/3 for adverse events, allergy, persisting neutralizing antibodies, about 25% for lack of efficacy in terms of relapses or conversion to secondary progression of the disease, and in 45% for convenience, I would say pregnancy, or they don't want to go to take the drug for any reason, or they are feared about PML risk and so on. What about the safety? I don't want, again, to go into details, but only to say that at the present time, we are aware of 8 cases of PML, which are definite cases, and there are 2 other pending cases, which will be confirmed. You may see here that 1 case of PML has led to disease, and the 7 others are still alive, but with high amount of disability related to the disease. We have also the mention here of the other causes of death. I don't want to go into details again. We have some cases of cancers, either lymphoma of the gut here or solid organ cancers here. Allergic reactions, we are aware of 15 allergic reactions, mainly on the occasion of a second infusion, which is classical, but sometimes it can occur later, at the 3rd, at the 5th, or at the 6th infusion. We're also aware of some, infections vis-à-vis, but eventually not so much. The main infection, the most frequent by far at the present time, is PML, if we look at severe infections. And regarding the hepatotoxicity, we have not so many cases also. The last point is about efficacy. At the present time, we are aware of, we can calculate the effect of the drug on relapses and on the EDSS score, and you may see it is a dramatic effect of the drug. I told you before that the relapse rate in the year before natalizumab was close to 2. Following during the treatment at the first year, the second year or the first year, it's between 0.25 or 0.33. So it's a dramatic response in terms of relapses. Regarding the EDSS score, our experience is more or less close to that of the Italians. We see globally similar level of disability, or even some decrease, but anyway, we don't see further accumulation in the vast majority of the cases of disability in this population. So this effort has led the authorities to be rather satisfied with the story and to consider that this national system deserved some extra support, and we have been selected by the French ministry for what we called, what Nicolas Sarkozy called the investissement d'avenir, so future investment for the future, which is a very important program and which provides us some funding, about 10 million euros for the forthcoming 10 years in order to maintain this cohort and to make it available to the community. I mean, it's available for research on the clinical evolution of the disease, MRI, treatments, and so on, so for biological material, for also pharmacoepidemiological study. And the key point of this system is that with this large cohort, which is growing, the same software, the involvement of all the neurologists in their daily practice, which is very important, it's incorporated in their daily practice. You have information naturally on any drug the patient is taking. Today it's TYSEDMUS, but when new drug will come on the market, we will naturally incorporate that in the system to have a post-marketing survey of the patients treated, for instance, with fingolimod or the drugs. So we have in place at the present time a permanent multi-drug pharmacoepidemiological surveillance system in the country. So this is all for today. Thank you.